about anything but to staff, that they send those to Ms. Moody, and then Ms. Moody gets an answer and sends the answer back to all the committee members. Is that a fair statement of how you normally have done it in the past?
Correct, yes.
I think that's a good idea because usually when someone asks a question and shoots an email to Ms. Moody, it means probably that there's at least 2 or 3 other members of the committee that have questions. And so if we could all get the answer to questions, I think that would be good. My second thing is less clear, and that is we've got a pretty aggressive schedule for next week and the following week. But having said that, we also have, 2 new commissioners and 2 new public members on the budget committee, 4 out of the, is that right, 4? Out of the 10 members. So we may need more time in the schedule. And I'm wondering if, Christine, you've thought about this and if you have suggestions on where we would be able to do that. Perhaps, is the 14th on Tuesday an evening available?
The 14th, which is a Thursday, we could potentially look at that, yes. I would just have to look at who potentially is using.
Well, maybe it's the 12th then. I was thinking Tuesday.
So we have meetings that day, that afternoon, but are you thinking just going later into the evening as needed?
Well, it's up, I'm raising this not because I think I need more time. I'm raising this because in the past, the new members, they gain some speed. At first, they don't ask for many questions, and then they kind of build up speed. And by the end, they're asking a lot of questions. And so just thinking about how to build in some additional time on the schedule without it ruining the whole schedule, but just be thinking about that as what I would describe as a normal process of the new members asking fewer questions in the beginning, and then as the questions continue to be asked, then they start shooting more questions.
That's good. I was just going to say, we do also, last year we had added another meeting. That is continued this year. And on that 14th day, we do have some time for the 1920 initiative discussion, but I think there's some extra time on that day. So there always could be additional time on that day too. But yes, we can also look at other days as needed.
That's what I was just going to share the same thing, that we have 2 hours carved out on the 14th. 90 minutes for the new initiatives in the budget. I don't think we think it's going to take 90 minutes, and then 30 or 35 minutes for committee discussion. So there's roughly 2 hours at the end of the process if there are more questions. If you want more than that, we certainly can find some additional time, but we tried to build some of that time in there for Q&A at that stage.
Okay, and that's enough for me for now.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate Commissioner Sorensen bringing up the point that we do have 4 new members of the Budget Committee, including 2 elected members. That being said, quite often there are questions that come up that really deserve an answer, but sometimes the answer to a procedural question is particularly lengthy. And I would hope that we'd all use discretion in responding to particularly lengthy questions that really pertain maybe to only one person or 2 people that need to hear it, and do that in either a private message or a more detailed memo, as opposed to keeping the entire staff over for extra time during the budget process, which is a very deliberate process. Questions are not just welcome, they're encouraged, of course, but lengthy answers that maintain they keep staff in the room for an extra evening meeting or extra hours that could be answered with a memo that would completely satisfy the question. I would hope we'd use that discretion. Thank you.
Other issues from the committee? Ms. Moody, do you have any other directions you'd like to advise?
Sure, or just some additional information that I think you're aware of some of it. We do have all of the information that the Budget Committee is receiving out on our website so that the public can see what you're seeing too. For committee members, it's out on Dropbox for those of you doing electronic, and then we will be handing out papers, but sometimes at the beginning of the meeting, sometimes at the end. We will have a packet for you today with some answers to questions and some other agenda for the next meeting and those kind of things to keep things moving. We will also have note cards. Jill's actually walking in with them now. I see them. For those questions that you might think of during a presentation. And then if you don't get to them, when we have the time for questions, then we collect those note cards at the end and then get those answers back to you the same way as if you were to email us a question. So another opportunity there. And then finally, I'd like to introduce budget staff to you. I think everyone probably met them, but just for everyone in the room, we have Jill Allen and Joe Celesta back at the table. So the three of us are helping staff the committee. So anything that you might need, reach out to us. And then finally, there are restrooms right outside the door of Harris Hall for anyone who may need them this evening. I think that's it.
Very good, thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to Roman numeral 3, which is the budget message. Mr. Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, members of the Budget Committee, elected officials, directors, county employees, and members of the public who are here tonight. I want to particularly take just a moment to welcome our new citizen members to the Budget Committee and thank you in advance for your contributions to this process. On behalf of our executive leadership team here at Lane County, I'm pleased to present the proposed fiscal year 2019-20 budget. This is my fifth proposed budget as Lane County Administrator and Budget Officer. In 2015, for those of you who were here at that time, you may recall that we set a 3-year goal to eliminate the structural imbalances that were ranging from $6 to $9 million, particularly in the road fund and the general fund. And we achieved that goal in just 2 years. So for the third year in a row, our proposed budget is structurally balanced, which means that our revenues equal our expenses without having to dip into our savings account to pay for operations and ongoing expenses in any of our 32 funds. Moreover, there are no layoffs and no reductions in services in the proposed budget again this year. Our responsible management of taxpayer resources has resulted in an increase in the county's credit rating, a reduction in debt costs, little to no increase in medical claims costs per employee for 4 years in a row, and several local, state, and national awards. In 2018, Lane County was ranked as the #1 healthiest public employer in the state of Oregon, and the number 40th highest, healthiest employer in the nation. We also received the Outstanding Intergovernmental Team Award from the Lane Council of Governments for our work with the City of Eugene on downtown homelessness, and the Outstanding Community Partner Award from United Way. The financial stability that we've created is the result of focused efforts to proactively manage and reduce internal expenses such as PERS, health insurance, and debt costs. This stability has allowed us to put more funding into direct services to our residents. It's critically important that we understand that continued financial stability requires constant vigilance. Balanced budgets are the result of balanced decision-making every single day. The Board of Commissioners has identified, I have a few slides here that we'll share with you. The Board of Commissioners has identified housing, homelessness, mental health, substance abuse, and public safety as top priorities in its 2018 to 2021 strategic plan. Last year, we proposed and the Budget Committee approved $2 million in federal forest payments and other one-time funds to catalyze the construction of 90 new permanent supportive housing units in Lane County. For individual disabled seniors, youth aging out of foster care, offenders reentering into the community, and chronically homeless individuals. We just had the groundbreaking of 2 of those projects, one at Sponsors and one at Square One. Sponsors off of Roosevelt in North Eugene, and one with Square One Cottages in Cottage Grove. So this year, this very successful project, and part of what we're trying to do in the budget is at the same time that we're balancing and making sure revenues are meeting expenses and being accountable and financially responsible to taxpayers, we also recognize that there are great needs in the community that are still unmet. And a budget is, in addition to an allocation of resources, it is the single most significant policy statement that an organization makes each year, because we're saying where we're putting our limited resources to fund the most critical services in the community. And so again, this year we wanted to have a focus on aligning resources with the priorities that have been set by the Board of Commissioners. So we're very pleased to propose $1 million for a new behavioral crisis center. This is $1 million in prior year property tax settlement funds, one-time resources, as we say, which are different than ongoing annual revenues that will recur each year, one-time resources from a property tax settlement from Comcast, to invest, to seed a behavioral crisis center that uses evidence-based practices to treat mental health and substance abuse issues while lowering costs to the overall public safety system. We know that more than 6 out of 10 inmates in the Lane County Jail have a documented mental health illness or substance abuse disorder. We know that the jail is not the place to treat mental health and substance abuse issues. You can ask the folks sitting right back here from the sheriff's office. They'll be the first ones to tell you that the jail is not the place to do this. And in fact, the sheriff's office were the first ones when we had our budget meetings, and I asked then Sheriff Trapp and now Sheriff Harold, who was chief deputy at the time, if we were going to make a one-time investment in something that would significantly impact these issues around mental health, substance abuse, and public safety, where would you put that? And they both advocated for this proposal. We also know that our public safety system is stressed to the max in meeting true community safety issues. And so this solution, we believe, will improve community safety and lower the cost to our taxpayers. This facility will be the first step towards stability for people struggling with a behavioral crisis. So we are working, what we want to do with this, this is an initiative where we're saying we're seeding this effort. We want to call upon our partners, particularly our partners with the Mental Health Summit, our public safety partners, our partners in the healthcare arena, in the nonprofit service sector, and others in the private sector to support this effort. And what we really want to do here is to catalyze a community conversation and bring those partners together. You may have seen that there was an announcement today from Whitebird that they're opening a crisis center in the Whitaker, which is intended to be a drop-in facility, which is outstanding. This is not intended to duplicate that. This is intended to be a jail diversion model. We also have the Hourglass 23-hour, it's open 24 hours a day, but for 23 hours or less, individuals can be taken to that facility. Peace Health is also looking at the need for additional crisis services. So there's a lot of things happening. What we want to do is bring all of those folks together and make sure that we have a seamless, coordinated system of crisis support services in the community. This is all our effort to create a pathway to end homelessness and get people on a pathway towards permanent supportive housing. So I wanted to share these statistics. You may be familiar with our FUSE pilot project that looked at a number of individuals that were the most frequent users. FUSE stands for frequent users of system engagement. So the individuals that are most actively utilizing various costly systems like the emergency room and the jail and law enforcement and other systems. And through our Health and Human Services Department, our partners in the community identified a number of individuals over the course of a year, worked on a novel concept, which was if we just connect these folks with permanent supportive housing and connect them to services, let's track what happens. And here were the results. We saw an 82% reduction in law enforcement arrests with EPD. We saw a 50% reduction in jail intakes. We saw a 75% reduction in court citations, 53% reduction in overall healthcare costs, and a 26% reduction in emergency department utilization. So we know this is an evidence-based practice, and it's one of those steps to get people connected to the services they need. If any of you have seen the Seattle is Dying video that profiles mental health, substance abuse issues of individuals living on the streets, you'll understand exactly what we're talking about with this proposal. And you may have heard of the Chinese proverb that talks about the best time to plant an oak tree is 25 years ago. The second best time is today. And so this proposal is about seeding an investment that we believe will have a significant impact on the lives of people that are struggling in our community, as well as on the cost to these systems that provide other public safety services in the community. And I want to just share this graphic as well. This is, we developed this a couple years ago to demonstrate that the public safety system is a truly integrated system. When we just talk about one aspect of the system, we're not really addressing the issues that we need to. So when we talk about jail beds, that's an important component of the system, but we also have to talk about the extent to which we have law enforcement that can respond to calls for service, the extent to which we have prosecution that can deal with those crimes. Our DA's office has gone from 1,400 no-file crimes to virtually zero, which is much more effective at getting people diverted into the services they need and ending the cycle of recidivism as opposed to racking up multiple charges and then going away for a longer sentence. That we have to have parole and probation officers that supervise individuals that have been referred to supervision. And then all of that is needs to be fed into a system in the community that has mental health, substance abuse, and housing services. So I want to share this graphic again, that this year our proposal is to help support some of these community-based services that are critical. So in early 2019, the Board of Commissioners committed to implement various recommendations to transform the homeless systems in Lane County, commonly referred to as the TAC report. TAC stands for the Technical Assistance Collaborative, which is a consultant in Boston, Massachusetts. We hired, City of Eugene and Lane County hired this group to do a study on transforming our homeless systems, and that has really helped to be a catalyst for bringing a lot of us together and having common language and understanding about what we have and what we don't have and what we, as a community, as our policymakers and organizations, need to invest in. This graphic came from that, so I'm not intending to go through all of this, but it's a visual depiction of the various stops along a pathway towards ending homelessness. There is no silver bullet. There is no easy fix. We oftentimes talk about permanent supportive housing, and it is the most evidence-based practice towards to ending that cycle and to getting people off the streets and connected to the housing they need, but there's a lot of other things that are needed. So in our proposed budget, with a goal towards ending homelessness by creating a pathway that addresses the diverse and complex issues unhoused residents face, we are also proposing adding funds for the continuation of the successful Dawn to Dawn shelter model. We did that this year, and these things have evolved. Every year they evolve. Dawn to Dawn was new just a couple months ago. And to the credit of St. Vincent de Paul and other community partners and our partners at the City of Eugene, you know, we recognize the need and continue to adjust those things, and we saw a lot of benefit and value towards having emergency shelter available, not just from 6 p.m. till 6 or 7 a.m., but actually having facilities available for individuals that may need a respite throughout the day. So we're adding that funding we came up with in the middle of the year. It wasn't budgeted for this current fiscal year. We're adding that funding in there. 50% of the total cost Lane County is proposing, and we're asking the City of Eugene to support funding for the other 50% of the cost. So it's a partnership effort. We also have included funds for 50% of the cost of the first phase of the homeless systems transformation report, that TAC report, specifically 3 positions that we can talk about in greater detail, but that are really focused on both higher level catalytic strategic leadership in the community, an individual that has the leadership capability to bust barriers at the systems and strategic level in the community to make public shelters and large proposals happen, as well as more technical frontline support services that will help with data analytics to connect individuals to existing resources and make sure that we're efficiently using the existing housing and services. Today, we know that not 100% of available housing units are used all the time. And so let's first look at how we can effectively use what's there, as well as individuals on the ground that bust barriers to housing. So things like, identification that's needed for an individual on the streets to be able to do housing, background checks, working with landlords, and triaging. So we've included 50% of those costs, and again, we're asking the City of Eugene to partner with us and support the other 50% of those costs, and they have been conceptually supportive of that process so far. All of these conversations are ongoing as part of our TAC steering committee, implementation steering committee that includes Commissioner Farr and Commissioner Buck, as well as the mayor and a counselor and a number of other individuals. So we'll shift here briefly to infrastructure and talk a little bit. This is a rendering of a modern courtroom, what a modern courtroom would look like as part of our 2018 scoping study for a new courthouse. And the process that we've gone through with the community. Of course, everyone is aware that there's a ballot measure on the May 21st ballot that the Board of Commissioners has referred a measure for $154 million 20-year bond to the community for the construction of a new, what is really a justice center. It includes courthouse, sheriff's office, district attorney, parole and probation, victim services, and public defender's office. And the idea, this budget includes $4 million in addition to the ask of local taxpayers. The budget includes $4 million in one-time federal forest payments to support, along with the requested approximately $94 million from the state of Oregon for a total project cost of $252 million. And so I just wanted to share a graphic of what a modern courtroom would look like. And really what this project is all about is making sure that we have equal access to justice for everyone in our community. Whether you're mobily impaired, or you're a victim or a witness or an offender that is in custody, that you have equal access and equal rights to a fair and impartial judicial process, and that our courts can support speedy and effective justice for our community. So a modern courtroom allows for the flexibility of the court to be used for various things, not only jury trials, but also for what we know has been evidence-based practices of treatment courts, these specialty courts, veterans court, mental health court, drug court, that have been hugely effective at diverting people from the criminal justice system into a more productive place. And so that's what this project is really about. And again, our budget includes $4 million in one-time federal funds to help support that effort. In addition, we recognize that on the heels of the adoption of a new park master plan that the Board of Commissioners has now adopted that is long overdue, we recognize that our park system is woefully underfunded, as are other services in our community. And we wanted to make an effort towards beginning to catalyze the improvements that are needed in our park system. And so we proposed 2 additional positions funded with transient room taxes and car rental taxes to support both a recommendation from an audit that was completed previously regarding a cash handling, as well as a position that would coordinate with neighborhood groups and friends like the Friends of Buford Park to create more friends groups that can help support our park system. We also recommend funding a facility condition assessment, park upgrades that have a return on investment. So the board talked yesterday about a park on the coast, and we had a brief conversation about opportunities to invest with one-time resources in improvements in parks that will both meet the demands in the community for access to our outstanding recreation opportunities throughout Lane County, but also generate revenue for our park system. We'll talk more about that as we get into the process. And finally, we recommend the creation of a task force on parks funding to engage with our Park Advisory Committee, with passionate residents throughout our community that care deeply about our parks, to have a conversation about what the long-term solution for adequately funding our park system is. We fund an additional $1.5 positions in emergency management. We're really excited with the transition that the sheriff's office has supported in moving emergency management from the sheriff's office into county administration. Make sure that it has a county-wide focus. Our new Office of Emergency Management that is staffed by Patience Whittingham from the city of Eugene. She has just, in a short amount of time, done a phenomenal job with two major natural disasters. First, a winter storm in February, and then a spring rainstorm in March, in building partnerships and really elevating our emergency management capability and response. And so we're recommending adding 1.5 FTE to that function to help support those efforts, to continue to create the capacity within our organization, our community to respond, to be prepared to and respond to natural disasters. We're also recommending the funding of a backup EOC. Our current Emergency Operations Center is in the 1959 60-year-old courthouse building. And we're recommending funding that will create a backup EOC at our Delta campus so that we will have emergency operations centers on both sides of the river and an adequate space for us to be able to both train, prepare for, and respond to those disasters. And finally, we're really pleased with the progress that we're making on identifying a more adequate space for our parole and probation staff. For those of you that had an opportunity, I think last year, to tour parole and probation, they are out of space. The space is inaccessible, inadequate, and we're working and doing some great work to identify space to relocate that operation. So I want to now, those are sort of some of the new highlights and initiatives in this proposed budget. I want to take a step back, and I think it's important to reflect on what it's taken to get to this point, because it hasn't happened by accident. Focus, collaboration, creativity, innovation, and oftentimes just asking the question, why do we do it this way, and is there a better way to do this, has led to some great success in creating the financial stability that we have today. So first, on constraints that we've faced, this is a nice graphic that we put together to illustrate that for every tax dollar, it's interesting, I talked to a CEO of a company locally who was asking about property taxes. He said, I pay this much in property taxes, and isn't that enough for Lane County? I said, well, look at your property tax bill next time, because about 10% of that total bill goes to Lane County. 90% of it goes to the other taxing districts. It's oftentimes confusion that our residents and taxpayers have because their bill comes to Lane County. We collect it, right? Lane County Assessment and Taxation collects property taxes, and then we distribute it to the various taxing entities, and this gives you a visual representation of where that money goes. About 11 cents on the dollar comes to Lane County. That includes our permanent property tax rate as well as the 5-year public safety levy. 47 cents goes to the school districts, 32 cents to cities, and then you have libraries, parks, and fire districts. And so that money gets distributed to these different entities. And it's interesting, this is a difficult graphic I know to read, but we share this often. On the left, you'll see these are the 36 counties listed throughout the state of Oregon on both charts. And on the left shows per capita income, total income, local per capita revenue in the 36 counties, and it ranks lowest to highest. And you see Lane County is where the arrow is pointing there. So we're the third lowest per capita total local revenue of any county in the state, and we've circled in red our 5 comparable counties. We oftentimes compare ourselves to our like counties, Washington, Clackamas, Deschutes, Marion, and Jackson counties. On the right side are tax rates. So left is total per capita revenue, and on the right is our permanent property tax rate. We're the 7th lowest, so you see the arrow to Lane County, 7th lowest permanent property tax rate at $1.28 per thousand. You'll see Deschutes County just below us in their permanent rate, but interestingly, this doesn't capture their public safety districts. So they actually have 2 public safety districts they've created that are separate rates, not included in their permanent rates. So they actually don't fund public safety out of their permanent rate as Lane County does. So $1.28, and that rate worked for a while when we had timber revenue that was coming in. And then in the mid-90s, we had the property tax caps, statewide property tax caps that went into effect. And around that time, we start to see changes in federal policy and logging on federal lands. And this graphic here shows you representation going back to 2001, 2002, inflation adjusted. The amount of revenue we collected in the general fund and the road fund for public services just less than 20 years ago, over $40 million per year, has essentially been wiped off the books. $40 million that we used to invest in public safety, in rural patrols and prosecution and assessment and taxation and an adequately maintained road and bridge infrastructure. And so as those policies changed and the Secure Rural Schools program began to decline, and that entitlement program is no longer an entitlement. It hasn't been reauthorized. They've done sort of one-off years, and you see a spike a couple years ago where we received that. But we're essentially down to the actual harvest number that's happening because the SRS program isn't. So we have this perfect storm where we have an artificially low property tax rate because we didn't need to tax our taxpayers because we had all this federal revenue. And then the taxes are capped and the federal revenue goes away, and here we are, stuck in this spot of flat revenue, really inadequate revenue to support the services that our community demands and really should expect. So 93%, seventh lowest property tax rate in the state, 93% reduction in federal forest payments over the past couple decades, $6 to $9 million structural imbalances in the general fund and the road fund in just the last few years. And I just want to reflect on the fact that a lot of work has gone into focused and diligent efforts that have included health insurance. 4 years ago, we shifted from a fully funded health insurance plan to a self-funded plan. Really critical to gain control of our claims. And then we said, that's the first step. Now we need to proactively manage this. And the point was to say, we spend $30 million a year on health insurance for our employees. It's a wonderful benefit that we want to be able to maintain. But if that 30 million continues to grow by 10, 15, 20% every year, we're going to have to cut services in order to just fund the same benefit. So how do we manage that pool of resources? Because unlike PERS, we actually have some control over health insurance benefits if we can proactively manage that. So we moved to a self-insured plan. We opened a wellness clinic for our employees. We've invested in diet and exercise and incentives to get employees to participate in these things. We now have 70% participation among our workforce at our wellness clinic. Huge, we don't have time to go through all the huge success stories that are really compelling, and we'll invite Mary Miller when it's time for Human Resources to talk about their work, to share some of those incredible stories that have really not only impacted our bottom line, but impacted the lives of our employees in making them healthier, more resilient, and productive in the workforce. Our per employee per month costs are lower today than they were in 2014. So 4 years in a row, we have extremely low to zero growth in health insurance costs, where at the same time you've seen on average around 10% growth in other public employers and in the private market. Debt, we've really focused on prepaying debt if we can with one-time resources, on refinancing existing debt at lower interest rates to save taxpayers money. Significant impact that I'll touch on in a moment on that. And PERS, very limited ability to adjust. We can't change the benefit. That's been litigated. But we are looking at within what the state has allowed, and last year we had a proposal to invest in a PERS side account that the governor and the legislature had put forward. We're still working to make sure that fund is fully funded, but we're going to take every opportunity to proactively manage that expense with the tools that we have available to us to make sure that we try to control that cost. We've invested in and scrubbed our vehicle fleet and computers and technology equipment to make sure that we have only what's needed and the most energy efficient equipment possible. The voluntary separation incentive program that we did a few years ago in public works and among our non-represented employees resulted in 31 positions being vacated voluntarily, and a $750,000 annual savings. And that was a really nice tool to be able to smooth out the transition of positions leaving without having to result in layoffs, but still achieve some of the savings that we needed. And of course, new revenue has been critical, both from the 2013 approval and the 2017 renewal of the public safety levy, as well as the state of Oregon's transportation fund package that was approved in the last legislative session. Lastly, I want to touch on talent acquisition, retention, and advancement that continue to be high priorities for Lane County. We have some really good news. And there are two sides to this coin. We have some really great news that I think deserves to be celebrated about our workforce. First, we know that we have an actively engaged, passionate, committed, focused workforce in Lane County that are doing incredible work, that care deeply about the work that they do to improve lives in our community. And they like their work here. In 2017, in our countywide survey that's conducted by a third-party national benchmark survey, 90% of employees expressed job satisfaction, 90% job satisfaction among our employees. Our positions are more competitive in the market today than they have been in years. In 2018, we had the lowest turnover rate in at least 7 years, about 10%. And 10 to 20% is about the sweet spot of where a public agency, we have consistently been below the national benchmark for state and local governments on turnover. So 10% last year was really good and the lowest that we've had in quite some time, despite heavy competition for talent in what has been a roaring economy for several years and continues to be. Investments in resiliency. We have areas that are high stress, challenging environments for our employees to work in. Public safety, public health. You can look at our parole and probation and sheriff's office and the high stress environments in the public safety arena. And yet we've done great work with the engagement and really advocacy of our employees who have participated, who've asked for mindfulness programs in public works, through the leadership and retirement changes that we've seen over the last several years, yoga and other support systems. We've seen wonderful improvements in resiliency among those workforces. And yet there are areas that require more focus and attention to improve stress, communication, and recognitions in our departments. We've heard this from employees. We heard it from one of our bargaining units a few days ago, and we're committed to continuing to work with our employees to engage and identify solutions that make Lane County an employer of choice, where our employees feel engaged and empowered to be their best. The three things that create a vibrant workforce and really keep employees motivated are autonomy, flexibility, and purpose. A feeling of having some ownership and ability to do their work without having to be told every minute what they're doing, to be masters of what they do, to be excellent at the work that they do, and then to feel a connection, a personal connection to that work. And a lot of what we've done in the last year is focused on identifying our purpose to improve lives in every single person in our organization, whether you're working in payroll in the finance office, or you're a parole and probation officer supervising offenders, or you're a nurse practitioner in a clinic. Every single person in our organization contributes towards improving lives in our community. And we want our employees to feel that personal connection, because when they make that connection and then they're supported by their supervisors and they feel a sense of autonomy and mastery in what they do, we can handle any challenge. So we have work to do to get to that point, but we're committed to it. So here are the things that we're working on and that we will continue to engage our employees in. Qualitative interviews with employees, not only exit interviews when they leave, but stay interviews when they're still here, so that we understand what's working well and what isn't and how we can improve. Mentoring programs, so that we're matching employees that desire to move up and have a career in Lane County with other leaders in the organization to help support that ongoing development. a new performance evaluation tool to make sure that every employee receives a thoughtful evaluation each year, and that it's a two-way conversation between the supervisor and the employee. Career development trainings, again, so that we support the ongoing development of our employees. Our Emerging Leaders Program, and this is a picture that shows the two cohorts. I'm so excited about this program and the individuals who've gone through this. 42 of our employees who are not supervisors, but are interested in leadership development, have gone through two cohorts of this program, led by Aaron Rollins in our Human Resources office, who's done a phenomenal job with this program. 70+% of these individuals are women. 38% of the individuals who've gone through this, graduated this program, the 42 individuals, have been promoted or in career development opportunities in the past year. They also are actively engaged in various committees and efforts that I'm talking about here. Training for new supervisors. We know that supervisors are the front line of working with our employees and making sure that we have good communication and recognition and stress management. And so making sure that we invest in the training and development of our new supervisors, that we're not just promoting individuals who are great technicians, but that we're supporting them in their supervisory role. Enhanced use of recruitment tools and data analytics. I'm really excited. Laura Vincent and our HR team have done great work. In the past 4 months, this year alone, 25% of our applicants are non-white. 25% of our applicants for all positions open in Lane County are non-white. 53% of all of our new hires are women. 20% of all of our new hires are non-white. And over 50% of our managers in Lane County, this is not just the last 4 months, but as we stand today, over 50% of all managers in Lane County are women. We're also investing in new employee orientation and onboarding processes and a renewed commitment to our equity work through a comprehensive equity plan and lens tool. We have a team of folks that are going to participate in a series of trainings up in Seattle around race in the workplace, and we're excited about the work that will result from that. So there are 5 committees that are working on these various initiatives. 22 in those 5 committees, 22 frontline union represented employees are participating on those committees, along with supervisors and managers, truly working together to develop the plans for these employee engagement initiatives. So we're really excited about that. We have a lot of work to do, and I could go on, but I'll stop there. So all of this is presented to you despite the fact that we continue to experience significant pressure from wages and benefits. That's just a reality that many organizations, particularly public organizations in Oregon, face. We are spending $33 million on PERS in the proposed budget. That's a 17% increase. And again, we have very little control over that. We estimate about a 4% increase in wages, $115 million in wages in this budget. And we want our wages to be within market. We need our positions to be as close to market as possible so that we can recruit and retain the best talent in the organization. We have to be able to pay for it. And so again, our focus has been on health insurance, managing that cost, $30 million a year that we've maintained essentially flat, is critically important. And debt. We have $79 million in debt on our books today. That's a $28 million reduction in debt in the past 4 years alone. 26% reduction since 2015 in debt. So that also has been one of our strategies in trying to relieve that debt pressure so that we can meet our obligations. So as we move forward, let's remember that it's taken a great deal of focus and diligence to create the financial stability through a structurally balanced budget, which has allowed us to pursue these important initiatives like our housing improvement plan and this behavioral health crisis center. Again, a balanced budget results from balanced decision-making every day. Lane County has been recognized as a statewide and national leader because of the great people that we have here and the creative and innovative solutions to solving community challenges and creating an environment where talent and leadership thrive. Our employees demonstrate a passion to serve, a drive to connect, and a focus on solutions every day in the work that they do to improve lives in our community. I want to thank, in particular here, Christine Moody, Jill Allen and Joe Celesta in our budget office for their great work. They worked tirelessly to prepare this document. I also want to thank all the budget staff in our departments that work behind the scenes. And we have a very open and transparent and collaborative process in developing our budget. They do great work, and they spend a lot of time doing that work. And I want to close by just offering on behalf of our organization, my sincere gratitude and appreciation to all of our employees throughout Lane County who continue to demonstrate a commitment to community-focused solutions and to building excellence in our workplace. And so we're very pleased to present this to you. I'm happy to answer any questions. We have a couple minutes. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Are there any questions? Yes.
I just want to thank you, since this is my first Budget Committee day. And it's exciting to hear the work that you're doing, and I'm really encouraged by the direction that you're looking to go. My only question is, can we get an electronic or paper version of your slides?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll post it online and email to all the committee members the presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I really enjoyed the presentation of the budget to the Budget Committee, and I can't promise the Budget Committee will do as much work in deciding on the budget that the that the effort's been gone into to present this budget, but we'll do our very best. I just wanted to ask a question about the page in the proposed budget about the countywide intergovernmental agreements, dues, and association costs. There's a tab in our materials, I think it says county dues, and
What page are you on?
well, that's all it says. It's a tab that's labeled county dues, and there's a list of all of the well, not all, but many of the organizations. I guess their list is countywide intergovernmental agreements. And I just wanted to clarify where it says the FY 18-19 budget, that's the adopted budget. That's the budget we're in now until June 30th.
Correct.
Okay, so that's what the Budget Committee last year and the board last year approved for the budget that ends June 30, 2019.
It's the current year budget, right? I can't say for sure if there was any tweak to an invoice. I mean, we're going on projections at this point.
Okay.
The 1920. Sometimes we get an invoice that's a little bit different. So
Okay.
It's the budget as of.
And then the proposal to fund, for example, to take two as an example, the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency and the authority and the ONC membership dues, those two are premised upon the continued membership and the direction of the Board of Commissioners thus far to continue funding those groups. And it's your recommendation then that we fund those groups at this amount, slightly higher amount.
I think what I'd say about, in terms of recommendation, what I'd say is, I think all of these items, and I know there's been discussion at least about one of the memberships, is a policy decision. And so previously, the policy decision has been to fund these organizations. There's a history of that. And our position is that, you know, if the Budget Committee and the Board of Commissioners want to change that policy, that's a policy decision to make. It's not a policy decision for us to make, to say we're going to fund a new one without direction, or we're not going to fund one that we historically have without direction.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because just because it's been proposed in this budget to fund these at these levels doesn't mean that the Budget Committee will necessarily decide that. But the Budget Committee has to have somewhere to start, and the proposed budget is where we start from, and I get that. And I just wanted to clarify that for the Budget Committee, that this isn't a policy choice entirely by the county administrator, who's the official budget proposer in the Oregon budget system. It's that barring any change in policy or direction, this is what we did last year, and this is what we're likely to do next year, but it's up to the Budget Committee to bless or change or increase or decrease the numbers on those. And I just wanted to bring that to the attention, and also to highlight that there's a different amount in the 18-19 budget than in the 19-20 budget. It's a different number, different year. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Abel.
First, I'd like to just mention how phenomenal all this is. I mean, I've been around this county now for 40 years, either as an employee or a budget committee member, and I'll tell you, it's in those old days, it was nothing like this, so congratulations for that. I do have one specific question. Those Fuse results were very interesting, amazing. How many people were involved in that?
I'm going to invite Karen Gaffney to, I think I know the answer, but she'll definitely give you the right answer.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Budget Committee. The Fuse pilot results from the first year that were up there were based on our effort to identify 100 of the most frequent users, and then to work to find them, engage them in services, and then ultimately move them through services. So for that pilot project, ultimately, I want to say it's 11 who were actually moved into permanent housing, and then a larger group of people in addition to that who had some level of engagement in services. And so those results are based on the people who were engaged in services at some level.
Thank you.
Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a continuation of that, that was the pilot program. We've worked on that program, and it's expanded since then, as we'll see newer, greater numbers than the ones you've already seen. So Karen's been a little bit humble about what Fuse has done. Along the same lines, Mr. Mokrajewski, it's so encouraging to me to find money in our budget, even when we're looking at a drop from 40 million to less than a couple of million in general fund dollars from timber harvest. Even when we're seeing that kind of reduction, we find $1 million to work on what the Mental Health Summit has been working on, which is a crisis response center, a crisis center. And we do have a 23-hour crisis center right now, but this is planting the seed for the future of a crisis center where predominantly municipal police, but all police have an opportunity to take people who are in crisis. Instead of the only place they can take them now is to the jail, to take them to a place where they'll receive treatment, potentially stay overnight, potentially stay for several nights, 30 days even, if that's what it takes to get people into stabilization and treatment. It's going to be remarkable once we get that going. I will say that, and we all know that $1 million is just a seed. It really is just a seed. We're hoping for a great deal of participation from other governments, from nonprofits and caregivers to make this thing work. We have a model that we're looking at in Jackson County, of course, that, in Marion County, that may look like the one that we're looking at. But really, I'm looking at Sheriff Harold right now. He and I have spent a lot of time listening to professionals talk about what is it that do we need to keep people out of jail, and it is a crisis center. So this is one of the most encouraging budget notes that I have ever heard in my many years of city, state, county, and school board budgeting. The fact that we are identifying where our dollars really need to be spent and putting them up front, seeding money from other organizations. Thank you very much. That is, once again, a tremendously high note.
Go ahead.
In response to the discussion that started with Commissioner Sorensen's questions about the dues, I have a question that is there a place in our budget documents, or is there a time when we can compare the investment that we're making in various dues, IGAs, association costs, with the measurable financial benefit that the county receives because of that investment?
I'll maybe take a stab at answering that. We're working on getting some information, so we have reached out to those organizations. I think you have some, including from the ONC counties on the back of the sheet that we provided so far, does show some gain there. So we're still working on that to get some quantifiable numbers for you, but yes.
I just want to simply acknowledge and thank those that have come before us new members to the budget this year about all the hard work that has been put in over the years to come to such a financially stable state that we're in now. I know that there were years in the past where it was all about cutting and slashing. How many jobs could we possibly save? And for a new member coming into this process in such a stable state is really phenomenal from where we've been. And really great place to start a platform, because now we're talking about, and we have been talking about in the last year or couple years, adding back staff at seriously low levels compared to where we were back then. So I want to acknowledge that from previous boards and staff that's worked so hard towards that.
Very good, thank you. Commissioner Sorensen.
I just want to go my second round after everyone's had a chance. Okay.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Could you, Christine or Mr. Mokais, could you go back to the slide showing the federal forest dollars and the precipitous drop that we had? Yeah, there it is. Okay, I just want to acquaint the Budget Committee with an interesting kind of personal story that relates to this. In October of 2000, which is, I believe, just before the 01-02 number, in October of 2000, Congress passed a law that provided for payments above the payments that otherwise would come into Lane County from either the ONC lands, the BLM lands in Southwest Oregon, including Lane County, and the national forest lands throughout the United States. So the guarantee under the Secure Rural Schools law put us up to close to $47 million at the high point, I believe. But maybe not all 47 million going into the road fund and general fund, maybe going to other jurisdictions. But basically, almost a $50 million. So you can see that across for the first 6 years, 7 years of it. Well, because Lane County was the largest recipient of these funds in the United States, when President Clinton signed this legislation, the White House asked if the chair of the Lane County Board of Commissioners could go to the signing ceremony. And I happened to be the chair in 2000 and got to go to that signing ceremony. But you can see that despite the efforts of our congressional delegation to try to keep this going, they did obtain a temporary ramp down in those numbers. And that's what you see in the 08, 09. And then finally, the complete program ran out and was not and has not been reauthorized. And there you see it, 16, 17, the lowest. We believe that the 1920 number, which I believe is the lowest, it is the lowest of all of that. So we're back to what Congress envisioned to get the counties based upon the cut level, the amount of trees cut. And despite the fact that during that entire period of time, we've had Republican administrations, Democratic administrations, Republican control of Congress, Democratic control of Congress, it's just been a steady downward trajectory. And I think it's really a credit to the organization, Mr. Mokreheiski's leadership in particular, but we did the employee wellness, we did the self-insurance, we did the entrepreneurial, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that in terms of getting more bang for the buck, more efficiency. We've really done a tremendous thing in light of that reality. That's a huge reality that we have dealt with and overcome. Well, maybe not overcome, but we've dealt with it.
And now you're chair again, we'll get it back, right?
I don't know. In the 2000 year, when President Clinton was president, both houses were controlled by the Republicans, and there was speculation in 2000 that this measure would not have passed. And so that was a unique opportunity that our legislative delegation got. But remember, that involved the entire United States, and 44 states were affected by that legislation. It was not just one state, i.e. the ONC lands. It was 44 states because it affected national forest lands. It was a guarantee to national forest lands.
Very good. Yes, go ahead.
I want to say thank you for the staff and everyone who put this document together. There's no way that we could know the stress that you have gone through and the many conversations I'm sure you've had. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Appreciate that. I had a couple questions as they did get brought up for the TAC report that was discussed, as well as the Lane County bond, the courthouse bond measure that's coming up. What would the implementation be with our current budget? Because both of those decisions, I'm assuming, are going to be after the budget has been decided on, at least for the budget committee process here.
So in reference to the courthouse, yeah, well, when is adoption? What's the date of adoption, sorry? Or approved by, when does the budget committee approve?
The budget committee will approve prior to the election, so
Yeah,
that
the
one I
election's
can-
on May 21st. So your question is about the $4 million in federal funds that have been set aside for that project?
Correct.
Yeah.
So I can tell you that the board is able to make a change to the approved budget. That will be an amount and a new fund that would be created if that bond measure does pass. So we'll actually have another public hearing. There'll be 2 publications of the budget. So it's another step that we will take, but it will be a part of the adopted budget that will be adopted in late June.
As a follow-up question to that, the $4 million, let's say the bond proposal does not pass, what happens to that $4 million line item?
That would be up to the Board of Commissioners to determine, yeah.
Likely, we would regroup, make a recommendation to the board on the it's one-time resources. So we always recommend if you have a one-time resource spent on a one-time expense, don't obligate it towards an ongoing, you wouldn't want to hire staff, for that pool of resources because at some point it's going to dry up. So we'd look at, are there other one-time needs that exist? Reserves is also always an option to make sure that we're maintaining the adequate reserve levels we'd like to have in each of our funds.
Mr. Abel, this will be the last one, I think.
Just to follow up on Tim's question, on TAC, you mentioned that 50% of the funding has been committed. Did I hear that right?
We're recommending 50% of the funding for the Dawn to Dawn program for next year and 50% of the funding for the 3 positions that would be new. And so we've set aside those resources for the budget committee to consider. And then what we've said is we've told our partners at the City of Eugene that we're only going to be able to move forward with these initiatives if the city is also able to allocate the other 50% of those costs. And those conversations have been positive and collaborative, and I think we're all moving in the same direction and desire.
Are those costs in the budget?
They are set aside, yes. So they're set aside, just not not in a department budget yet. So we've identified the funding. We just need the rest of, like he said, the rest of the revenue to come in to then put the expenses in, yeah. Yes, yeah.
Very good. One more if we make it quick. We're going to stay on schedule one way or the other.
I won't make it quick, so I'll wait till there's another opportunity.
If you could go ahead and fill out a card and submit it to the committee, or submit it to the staff. Ms. Moody, will you please, with the budget overview?
Right, thank you, Chair, members of the Budget Committee. So I will provide a budget overview here. A lot of this information is in your document, but I try and highlight some areas for you, give some context to things, and just sometimes present charts in a different way. When we see the data in several different ways, sometimes that can be helpful. So first I'll start with the overall proposed budget, which for 1920 is $710 million. Also showing you this very colorful pie chart here. This is meant to show you that we have 32 different funds that we are balancing within the proposed budget for 1920. FTE for the entire county is now at 1664 in the proposed budget. That's an increase of 10.5. We'll highlight those for you. You'll hear a lot more about those through the department presentations. But here I've shown you where those fit within our service categories so that you can see that clear to the right, public health, human services is now our highest FTE, then followed by public safety, roads, general government, community development, and culture and recreation, which is primarily parks and some other pieces there on that one. Also pointing you to some pages within your proposed document, so where you can find maybe more information or this same information. Total FTE, the page number there is back in your appendix. We show you things like the population of the county as opposed to the FTE additions that are occurring. There is a summary, page 66 in your financial planning summary, where we kind of go through these additions and where those are occurring. And then you can see all of the classifications that exist with those FTE in the county and the salary ranges for 1920 as of what's currently approved in the back of the document also. Then I just wanted to revisit some budget basics, some terminology that you'll hear, especially with new members. We use this terminology a lot, and then we forget that, oh, the public maybe isn't familiar with some of these words. So the basic first is that we will talk about revenue and resources. Revenue is part of our total resources that we have, but the difference is that in resources, you're also going to have money that you're carrying forward every year, which many times is the reserve, just coming back into a fund and then being reserved. And then transfers that happen between funds, which may or may not be one-time transfers. So those make up the resources. Revenue, of course, being our ongoing revenue, property tax, money received from all of our other funding sources, state, federal grants, fees, charges. Then on the expense side, we'll talk about expenditures and we'll talk about requirements. So expenditures in budget law are defined as personnel, material and services, capital, and debt service. And then items that are counted as requirements are going to be the transfers, the expense side of those transfers I mentioned, any contingency or reserves we have in a fund, and sometimes an unappropriated ending fund balance. Lane County doesn't have that at this point. The unappropriated ending fund balance is funds that you could set aside that you absolutely could not touch unless there was a public calamity. So we typically, our money is in reserves, which is easier for the board to get to in the case of an emergency. Some other budget terms, I won't read everything here, but you will have these PowerPoints, as was mentioned. They will be put up on the website and put into Dropbox for you. But here's some terms. Appropriation is a term that we say a lot. We'll appropriate funds. The definition of that is that we're saying the spending for a specific amount of money in the fiscal year for a specific purpose. Defining for you the items I just mentioned: personnel services, material and services, debt service. The transfers, many times we are transferring across funds for services to happen in one fund from another. With the general fund, we transfer some funds into primarily health and human services for youth services and some other places. So the movement of that money. Contingency is some money appropriated that is just in case you have expenses that you can't foresee at this point. So those contingencies will be in each fund, one contingency per fund. And then finally, reserves. The amount is budgeted, but it's not appropriated, so you're not planning to spend it, and it's not anticipated to be spent in the current fiscal year. Then just a little bit about the flow of the budget. So I mentioned the 32 funds. We do budget at the fund level. Each fund has to balance on its own. That is kind of the top of the chart, is the fund. Within the funds, you'll have what's referred to in budget law as an organizational unit. For us, that's our departments. So then you'll have a department, and then you'll have within the department the types of expenses: personnel, material and services, capital, and debt service. And just to go from that classification, the expenses I just mentioned, then it's going back again to that expenditures versus requirements and where you will find them. So throughout your document, you're going to see in your department sections, we're talking about department expenditures. That means you're seeing the personnel, the material and services, and the capital that's occurring within that department. Department budgets do not have reserves in them. They do not have contingency in them. Those belong to the fund. As I mentioned, the fund's at the top, then the department, then the expenses. So showing you the items that you'll find within each place, either a fund or a department. Then, of course, talking about balanced budget. So as we said, each fund has to balance. Under budget law, a balanced budget is just all of your resources equaling all of your requirements. Now, here at Lane County, we do go further than that. We look at the structural balance of the budget. So as Steve mentioned, we are looking at ongoing revenue versus ongoing expenses, and making sure that those two equal so that you don't have a structural imbalance and using one-time money for ongoing expenses. Okay, then getting into some more of the numbers. This is the revenue piece, so this doesn't include the transfers and the fund balance, those items I mentioned that are not revenue. It's a little small there, but just trying to show you the difference between the years. State revenue is our highest revenue source. That does include grants also. So it is going down just a little bit from the current year. The red bar that you see there as the second bar is the current year. The blue on the top is the proposed budget. Followed by that, we have internal fees and charges. Those are a lot of just movement between our funds and departments. I've split from that the external fees and charges. So what citizens may be paying is about the fifth one down there. Taxes and assessments being the third source, and federal revenue having dropped to the fourth based on the chart that you saw with the timber. It used to be our primary source of revenue, and then followed by other charges, administrative charges, some local revenue, interest earnings. The other pieces that make up the rest of the resources in the budget, just comparing for you here year to year, the fund balance, the transfers that are occurring. I will point out that the 18-19 to 19-20, there was a spike in transfers in 18-19 for the PERS site account that was mentioned, because we were transferring money out of two funds into another fund for the site account, so you don't see that again in 19-20. And then there's some intra-fund transfers, so within the same fund, but maybe across departments. And then there is one inter-fund loan. So I've given you the page numbers there in the proposed document, so you can go see more information on those if you like. Those are in the non-departmental tab also, where you're going to see those fund level expenses. On the expenditure side, material and services, personnel services, capital and debt. Material and services is actually our highest expense there, although going down a little bit from current year. Personnel services going up from current year, and then the capital expenses and debt, debt staying very flat. The other requirements, again, the transfers for the expense, the contingencies and reserves. These will also be found in that non-departmental tab within your document. And then I've given you page numbers there to see those. So there is a chart also in the document. I've just pasted it here so you can see it a little bit larger there. It's the exact same chart, but it talks about our reserves. And we started putting this in a couple years ago that shows you the amount of reserves by fund, but then also tries to give you some more information on the restrictions on that fund. Any reserves within a fund are going to have the same restrictions that the fund does. Example is road fund that receives transportation funds. Gas tax is constitutionally restricted. The numbers there are just internal numbers that we use, but the 200 series is our special revenue funds, so those are restricted. General fund is there at the top. And then just some conversation about why we have reserves, why they're needed. We, of course, have to have cash flow. General fund is a great example of we rely on property taxes, but those don't come in until November, December. Have to start paying our bills on July 1st, so you have to have a fund balance in order to keep that cash flow going. It's a requirement in the budget, as I mentioned, from budget law, just the type of expenditure it is. Bond ratings. So that's our credit rating, just like an individual would have. But the bond rating agencies do look at our reserves levels, especially in the general fund. They want to see that that is healthy and that you're able to keep that cash flow going. Many times it's for future equipment or capital projects. We have one capital fund in the county. So you're reserving for things that you know are coming up. Our computers, we reserve ahead of time. Our fleet, we're reserving ahead of time for those purchases. And then as a service and revenue stabilizer. So we have reserve policies that the board has adopted that specifically talk about a piece of the reserve being there in case revenue fluctuates, in case the economy does something, so that they would have the ability to maybe sustain some services for a couple years as economy recovers. And then asset protection. So you'll see that primarily in the road fund. They have a fairly large reserve because they have all those roads and bridges to maintain and protect. Here's some highlighted budget changes. You did hear about all of these from Steve, but just seeing them in a different way here. The additions of some FTE across different places, the $1 million for the Behavioral Crisis Center, and then there's some other smaller equipment pieces. These are identified in the general fund, replacing a search and rescue boat, and some elections computer service replacement. So a little bit on the general fund. As we've talked about, the general fund gets the most airplay probably because it is the discretionary fund for the board and the budget committee. The services that are within the general fund are listed there: public safety primarily, assessment and taxation, elections. We do have public health, animal services, property management, and then our internal services, finance, budget, the Board of Commissioners, county administration. The general fund pays for about 30 to 35% of the FTE of the county, to give you an idea of the personnel impact there. Showing you that same pie chart, but taking the slice out there, that's the general fund. For 1920, it'll be 110 million. That does include the 4 million that's set aside. So that reserve that we've been talking about for the courthouse is in the general fund. So that's part of the increase you're seeing from year to year. 412 FTE is what's proposed in the budget, which is an increase of 6. And then pointing you back to that page in balancing options that tells you about the additions that are happening. It'll identify those 6 FTE. And then there is a general fund tab in your document that has some more information too. I'll show you a couple of those charts here that are in the document. But the general fund resources, we do refer to the resources coming, the revenue coming into the general fund as discretionary and department resources. So discretionary department activity. Discretionary is property taxes, timber revenue, some of our state shared revenue that isn't always completely dependent on a department activity. And then there are departments that have their own services, concealed weapon permits as an example in sheriff's office, where they're receiving a fee, and so that revenue comes into their own budget. So that's the department activity. So we show that number just because we have tracked the discretionary general fund use by service. And so 52.7% of that is going to public safety in the proposed budget. And then you can see the other amounts there, public health at 7%. The contingency reserve is here. So this is showing you the entire requirements pie. It's not just showing you what's being spent. But you can see more information on that and more details about some of the pieces on page 68 in your budget document. And then the resources and the changes that we're seeing from year to year in the general fund specifically. Property taxes, the taxes and assessments clear to the left there is going up. Property tax growth is estimated at 3.75%. That's from our assessor for next year. Federal revenue, you do see kind of in the middle there, it is going down. That's because Secure Rural Schools has not been renewed, and that chart you saw where we're going back to the timber revenue, so that decreases that. And then fund balance, I just wanted to point out that does include that one-time fund for the Lane County Courthouse coming forward. On the requirement side, personnel services is seeing growth. Market and cost of living increases have occurred. We do also take into account vacancies. You'll hear the term vacancy variance. It really is just our efforts to budget what we think we'll actually spend in personnel. Typically, most governments are budgeting 100% of employment, but we know that's not going to occur. So it is now a best practice from Government Financial Officers Association to make sure you take into account vacancies at the beginning of the process. And that helps us to make sure we're structurally balanced. We're seeing just the operating ongoing expenses instead of carrying forward fund balance after we don't spend it. The material and services, while it appears very flat there, we did assume about 2.5% CPI growth. That's the Oregon Economic Forecast projection for 1920. And then there was one-time initiatives. Because the initiatives were similar in size, $1.5 million in the current year for the Housing Improvement Plan, and then the $1 million for the Crisis Center. That's why it's staying very flat there with the growth. Capital expenses, you can see that there's amounts, but it's so little, it's not really registering on this chart. But typically, you're not going to see capital expenses in this way coming out of the general fund. You're going to see that over in the capital fund, other places where the projects occur. And then reserves, the contingency reserves do meet the 20% minimum reserve policy that the board set last year. And then again, that capital reserve is in there. So the general fund forecast going forward for the current 2021, at this point of the game, it does appear to be structurally balanced. That is somewhat dependent, the 2021, on what wages do, some of those items that we don't know yet that haven't been finalized. But once we get to fiscal year 21-22, we do start to see more pressure on the structural balance. That's just because our expenses do continue to outgrow our revenue in many years. So we really rely on what the economy is doing, what the state budget looks like, those pieces. So I'm showing you there what the projected revenue expense growth is over the next 5 years. So as far as future cautions, I mentioned the revenue, the economy, the housing market. We continue to hear economists talk about a recession coming. When that happens, will have an impact on our budget. We see those impacts in our car rental tax, in our transient room tax, some of those pieces. State shared revenue, when they rely so heavily on income tax, can trickle down to the county. Our property tax growth stays fairly steady, but going over the 3%, which I mentioned we're at 3 3/4, is based on new growth out there, new construction happening. So if that stops, then the property tax growth does slow. And then one thing I didn't have on the slide here, but we are pretty dependent on grant revenue in some places, even within the general fund. One of those areas is the district attorney's office. You're actually going to hear from her that there is now a reduction projected in her budget. It was discovered after we proposed the budget, so there is a shortfall in the district attorney's office that we'll be talking to you about. Wage growth, this is looking back to 11-13. This is by biennium, and the reason is because I'm using some PERS projections too on the next chart that I'll show you. But so 2 years at a time, the red dot in the middle there being the year that we're going into. So wage growth is a continued pressure as we go forward. The out years of the forecast, PERS does assume about 3.5% growth. As you heard mentioned, the 1920 budget has a 4% growth in it. So we might outpace this dependent, but that will have pressure on the expense side of the budget. And then here's the PERS rate increases. So this is looking back to 11-13 actuals. You actually see, and I didn't point it out on the last one, you can see that the 13-15 dips from the 11-13. That's the last time that we had big reductions, was the 12-13 budget reduction. We actually see it in our expenses there. But PERS rates going up every biennium as they're adjusted. So the 1921 forecast there in red is the budget that we've built for you. As you heard, we have a PERS rate increase occurring, so quite an increase there. If you look over the span of this forecasted chart, rates will go up about 50% by the time we reach the 29-31 forecast. And then aging capital assets continues to be a concern to the county. In 2016, our performance auditor found that our assets were aging in all categories that she reviewed. And so that put us at risk for significant replacement costs, maybe even disruption of services. In response to that, we have gone forward with developing a county-wide capital improvement plan. The second one is currently in draft form. We'll actually send you a link to that so you can take a look at it. For the 2020 to 2024 plan, about $69 million in known and funded projects are identified. But you'll see as part of our plan, we also have started including pre-planning is what we call them, things that maybe aren't planned or we don't have a funding source identified, but it's a known need. And so those are identified too, millions more of those identified in the plan. And for additional information, the link is on here, but like I said, we will send that to you, the link, so that you can get to it easy. But we do have a lot of strengths. I've just showed you the cautions, but we do, as was already mentioned, have a very strong strategic plan that's looking at those key initiatives. We have strong financial policies, a good bond rating that has increased a couple times in recent years, service stabilization reserve, planning for known expenses when we can, the capital plan. We continue to build trust in the community, the public safety levy being a good example of that. And then our people and partnerships, diverse, highly skilled workforce who are deeply committed to delivering services to our residents. With that, I'm open for questions.
Any questions for Ms. Moody? Seeing none, thank you.
I have one.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Small hand.
I may have misunderstood, so happy to be told that. On one slide, it looked like the state revenue was decreasing for this fiscal year.
Correct.
And on another slide, the general fund slide, it looked like it was increasing. Can you explain that?
Sure. The first piece where it is decreasing is countywide, so all county funds.
Okay.
And then I zeroed in just on the general fund.
So why, can you point to why it's decreasing in the countywide?
I'll have to find which department that's occurring in.
Okay.
My initial reaction would probably be Health and Human Services, but we'll get you specific where and why.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, thank you.
One for Mr. Morris, please.
Yes.
And this doesn't, my question doesn't have to be answered today. I'm just curious about the history of the 20% minimum revenue. I'm just curious about when that got started and why it's 20%.
Reserve.
Yes.
Yeah, so GFOA, Government Financial Officers Association, puts out the best practices. They say you should have at least a 17.7% reserve for cash flow purposes. We've also been seeing where when we did have a lower reserve rate, that fund would go negative. The county would have cash to cover it before we would receive our property taxes. So the 20% gets us up to having that base and then a little bit for service stabilization. So the policy, we can send you the general fund policy. You can see where we've identified kind of the reasons for it and then the pieces of it, the 17 and the 3, to get to the 20.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Sorensen.
I'll just say, unlike our friends in the federal government, we are required to have a balanced budget. And when our fiscal year begins, July 1, we don't receive the revenue for that fiscal year until November. So we have to have money on board to pay the expenses. So that's the idea.
Thank you, Ms. Moody.
Thank you.
Okay, looking at the agenda, the next thing we have up is the public hearing. We're going to take a short break. Can we do, does everybody agree with a 5-minute break? We can start at 10 minutes after. Anybody? Okay, let's do that. We're on break. Okay. Back to order here. We're going to move on with the public hearing. We're going to, we've got a sign-up sheet here. We're going to go ahead and call out people in order. There is an additional sign-up sheet in the back for anybody who wants to sign up that hasn't signed up so far. We're going to set the timer limit for 5 minutes. And Tim, have you used the timer before?
I have not.
Can somebody give us the push this button thing, or?
Well, it would have to be modified to 5 minutes because it's set at 3, and that I do not know how to do.
Total time up. Look at that.
5 minutes, yeah.
Okay, next.
Oh, that was way too easy.
Boy.
And then Start, stop.
We're going to give it a shot. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start off with Ms. Wieldy.
Great. Thank you, and I clocked this at just over 2, so phew. So my name's Rose Wilde, and I'm a former Budget Committee member, and I now have time to say, wow, I was in those years where it went whoosh. So I'm totally jealous. I live on Peaceful Valley Road in Eugene, Oregon, and I sent via the Budget Committee email system an analysis of the budget for the District Attorney's Office, which came out of an effort we've recently created called Common Sense Justice of Lane County, and we're an outgrowth of members of Showing Up for Racial Justice. We don't have t-shirts, but we have buttons, and ACLU People Power, who have t-shirts but not buttons, and Common Sense Justice has a name. So I urge you to review this document prior to the next work session where you will hear from our district attorney. It represents about 2 years of learning, research, interviews, et cetera, conducted by a small group of committed individuals. You should have received a paper copy today as well. And we're concerned about the growing problem of mass incarceration in our community and country as a whole, particularly of Black, Native American, and Latinx people in our country and in our county. So for example, about 2.2% of Oregonians are African American or Black, according to the latest American Community Survey in the census, but a whopping 7.8% of people in jail or prison or otherwise under correctional control are African American or Black. So that's a really a much higher rate of incarceration. In fact, Oregon is 7th in the nation at the rate of incarceration of African American or Black people. The numbers aren't quite as high for the other groups that I've mentioned, but they are higher than they should be based on their presence in our population. So, I came to you because this is something that I didn't address when I was in your position, and I feel that now you can. A lot has changed in those 5 years since I've left, and you have a lot of opportunity now. So I encourage you to look at what I've presented, which is a critique written with love and appreciation that I put a lot of attention and focus, and we did, and my colleague up next will talk more about this. It's one of the things we found just in the budget document, and not in the materials that might be presented to you in future sessions, of course. We found really no evidence of how effectively our DA's office improves public safety or prevents bias from impacting the application of justice. There's no goals set in the budget, or very few at all, and the outcomes reported lack context or definition, which renders this public process somewhat meaningless. And I will say that that's true across the budget document. That's not necessarily true for the county as a whole, but within the document itself, very little of this is presented in a meaningful way, and you get about 11 pages of details in the memo that I wrote. So our failure to address the roles of racism and this community, also poverty, indicates that our county does have a lot of work to live up to the ideals that I know you hold and share. The organization Showing Up for Racial Justice, where I've been a member for the last few years, challenges especially white people to address the impacts of systemic racism in our institutions. People of color very generously gave us advice, information, or feedback, but also said that they'd been raising concerns about racism in our public institutions all of them, for decades. And they really need white people to take responsibility for racism that institutions we dominate allow to continue. So I ask you, as the Budget Committee and the Board of County Commissioners in the future, to consider some of the things that I've observed and my colleagues have observed as a starting point, but then to start having this conversation around what else might we be able to discover, learn, ask, and hold ourselves accountable to, and how can we communicate that through our public budget process? So you'll have my contact information via Ms. Moody if you care to follow up or have any more questions, and we definitely invite and hope to engage in a further conversation throughout the course of the year. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, Jenny Osteen, did I pronounce that correctly?
Thank you, and I prepared for a 2-minute presentation, so I re-entered my 1-minute the paragraph that I cut out. My name is Ginny Osteen, and I live in Springfield, and I'm a member of ACLU People Power. Forgot to wear my t-shirt, and am a co-signer on the document that Rose just described to you, and a co-convener of the organization called Common Sense Justice. So I wanted to approach this from a different point. At the moment, the budget report is the only document that's easily available to the public that gives any information about what, well, all departments, but especially in this case, the DA office really does. It's the office's opportunity to be transparent and accountable to the people that elect the district attorney and provide the taxes that help keep it functioning. And so this lack of information is statewide, and it has become a problem. It has been noted to be a problem. And so it's such a problem that House Bill 3224, which is the District Attorney Transparency and Accountability Act, is currently in the legislature and has passed the House. So this law will require that all DA offices to provide written policies regarding their core function of their office and make them easily available on the office's webpage. So it's easily available to the public. And this transparency law will allow the community to understand how the DA's office approaches its prime directive, which is to keep our community safe and reflects the values of our community. One point, at the moment, Lane County's DA's office has a few policies, written policies, but the most complete one that's available is the 4 policies on how an offender is charged when they commit a property crime, one of the 4 levels of property crime. In this 3-page document, which dealt with 4 policies, the phrase repeated was when charging someone, you needed to consider, quote, increase in community safety and offender accountability and punishment. In that document of 4 policies, the word punishment was written 8 times. There was no reference to rehabilitation, treatment, restoring an individual so that they can return as a productive member of the community. So the budget process, which everybody goes through and we've admitted is such a hard, stressful experience, is an excellent opportunity for the DA's office and all of the departments to provide in that process a mechanism for collecting and reporting some meaningful outcomes that are related to the use of our public resources. So we all want our community to be safe, and which has been shown can only happen if people responsible for crimes have the accountability, supervision, and support that they need to change their behavior and participate positively in their family, their community, their work, and the schools. So the DA's budget should tell us how their actions and how our funds are being used to work toward these goals. Thank you.
Marie Bowers.
Good evening, committee and chairperson. For the record, my name is Marie Bowers. I'm a fifth-generation farmer in Lane County, and I currently reside in Coburg. I'm also president of Lane Families for Farms and Forests. We are a volunteer organization of 100-plus members and growing, and we are actively engaged in the community, they're engaged community members who are concerned with keeping farming and forestry viable in Lane County. Together, through various programs and events, we're working on promoting the thriving agriculture and forestry livelihoods so they're here for generations to come. So I was sent here this evening to express our group's support of remaining in the Association of ONC Counties. We heard rumor that it might, or talks of getting out of it. So effectually, AOCC gives county an effective voice on issues related to the management of the ONC forest lands and the jobs these lands support, and the millions of dollars they provide for the county budget. It ensures the county has a seat at the table and is working proactively with state and federal partners on a number of issues that affect us as citizens. Lane County's role in AOCC is important to our economy. Forestry directly supports over 7,400 family wage jobs in Lane County, in which I should mention that 90% of the Lane County land base is in forests, and about over 60% of that's federal, which roughly I think 30% of that is ONC, that's harvestable timber that hopefully we can start harvesting again and make some money. So our local forest infrastructure depends on a certain and sustainable supply of wood fiber from ONC lands. Without this wood fiber, many tax-generating jobs and employers in Lane County would be in jeopardy. Without AOCC, it would be difficult for Lane County and others to ensure the lands continue to contribute to our local economy. Lane County's role in AOCC is important because revenues from the ONC lands is essential for the county to deliver quality public services. These revenues help keep sheriff's deputies on the road, which we need, especially in rural Lane County. They also support education and public health, housing, among other services. Lane County's involvement in AOCC helps ensure these revenues are available for the county to meet the basic needs of all citizens. Without AOCC, the work of the Budget Committee would be much more difficult. For over 90 years, Lane County and AOCC have worked to ensure the ONC lands to contribute to the economic and social well-being of our communities, to support vital public services, and to support both public and private sector jobs. It is important that Lane County has a seat at the table, which, just as a side note, does seem kind of silly that we would leave an organization that advocates for our county to get money. So I would just hope and encourage that you guys would stay in the AOCC, and I'll submit my testimony for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Chandra Lagu.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chandra Lagui. I live in the South Eugene District, and I work for and represent the environmental advocacy organization Oregon Wild. I'm here to speak about the same organization Ms. Bowers just did, but have a very different take on it. And though membership in the AOCC is a small budget line item for the county, I believe it's vitally important that you consider cutting it. In FY 17-18, Lane County paid from the general fund about $77,000 in membership dues and $30,000 into a litigation fund for the Association of ONC Counties. I think it's important that we think about where and how that $107,000 was spent on behalf of Lane County. And first I'll say that it's a little hard to know because the AOCC is not a public organization and doesn't disclose its budgets to the public or follow open meeting laws. So I think that's a concern we should consider in supporting it. But otherwise, it actually isn't too hard to figure out where that money is going. The purpose of the AOCC is to support timber harvest, which does provide funds to the county on the ONC lands, which in Lane County is about 375,000 acres. They're located in our backyards, like the Thurston Hills, the McKenzie Valley, and the foothills of the Coast Range. And the way that the AOC supports timber harvest is that over the past 25 years, they have sued and lobbied the federal government to reduce environmental and wildlife protections on those lands and to prioritize logging over all other uses and values on those public lands. And I would like to consider the costs of that lobbying effort over and above the actual line item of $107,000. There's a cost to our climate and to our water. More logging on our public lands means a loss of carbon to the atmosphere, which makes climate change worse. And that in turn degrades our water quality and increases fire danger. There's also a cost to our economy and our recreation here in Lane County. Travel Lane County spends a huge chunk of its budget, hundreds of thousands of dollars, promoting and supporting the outdoor and recreation industry in this county. People move to Lane County, raise families here, start businesses that pay taxes, like breweries and the growing organics industry, because of the high water quality, the quality of life, the outdoor recreation and beauty that our public lands provide, especially when they're not being overcut. So our budget future, actually, the solutions lie not in resource extraction, but in protection, restoration, and promotion of our public lands, which is not what the AOCC is promoting. So I just feel that this year's budget process is a perfect time to take action and stop funding this secretive anti-environmental organization. There are better ways to use general fund dollars. And membership in the AOCC is not essential to receiving federal funds. The BLM can cut timber without the AOCC lobbying on Lane County's behalf. And in fact, paying our dues and supporting that litigation and lobbying, Lane County is being complicit in an agenda that most Lane County residents don't support and isn't conducive to supporting the direction that our economy is heading. And then finally, you wouldn't be alone in considering this cut. Benton County and Multnomah counties have withdrawn their support of this organization, and Medi citizens are starting to raise concerns now that they're hearing more about it, because again, it's fairly secretive and not well known. As I've been doing education, people are a little astounded at the work that the AOCC does on behalf of counties. And in fact, the letter from Multnomah County withdrawing from the AOCC included that sort of incredulous tone, like, oh, we didn't know this is what you were doing on our behalf, and we don't think our citizens would support it, so we're going to withdraw. So anyway, I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to follow up with anyone who has questions about Oregon Wild's perspective, and we have a lot of history in working on public lands issues that we can fill you in from our perspective happily. Thank you.
Thank you. Cooper Ott.
Hello, I'm Cooper Audi. I live in South Eugene, and I'm speaking on the same issue as the previous two speakers. I'm going to start by asking for 100% of what I want, which is I want the county to pull out of the ALCC. I know that's something that some of you are not ready to do, so I'd like to propose or encourage two alternative options as steps along the road, maybe. Just don't pay the litigation fee. Pay the membership dues, go to meetings, but send a clear message by withdrawing from the litigation fee that, like, well, we don't support the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument lawsuit. The other one is related to the transparency issue. Post the meeting times and places. You don't need to get into the power structure of the AOCC to make it more transparent. I've been to an AOCC meeting. They were very surprised that somebody else was there who was not invited. They did not shut me out. So those are my two suggestions if you're not ready to withdraw entirely. Thank you.
Thank you. Can somebody check to see whether there's anybody else on the sign-up list in the back? There is not. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. And let's see here. There's a couple of items of business before we adjourn. Ms. Moody, do you have some items?
Sure, I just wanted to go over the handouts that should have appeared there in front of you on the break. You have a revised committee schedule. We have I think since you saw it last, added emergency management to the May 9th date. And then also, as you may have noticed, the performance auditor was going to speak this evening, but he's moved his presentation to another day also. So you have that. You have the agenda for Tuesday's meeting. We will be up in the Board of Commissioners conference room. That's where we'll be for all of our afternoon sessions. We'll be back down here in Harris Hall on the night that you deliberate. So you have that there to see who's presenting so that you can review their information in the document if you wish. You do have a new contact information sheet, and that's because we had a wrong email for Larry Abel. So just in case you wanted that. There was also you have a larger document that folds out. This was a request actually from Commissioner Buck. Notice that one of our charts that we did have in the proposed last year was not in. We do change our charts every once in a while, but she indicated that it was very helpful for her. So we want that feedback if you do like charts, because we won't take them out. So this one shows you departments and their expenditures and requirements in each individual fund. So a different way of seeing the budget so you can see that connection between departments and funds. A couple more things. Also, you have a one-page memo on Smith Dawson. That's one of the items that's on that IGA dues. So this was written about kind of a little history on the firm, and then some of the information on examples of their work for you. And then you have some responses to questions. So we did receive a couple emails, and so we provided you with those answers, including one additional handout. There was a question about road fund transfers to the sheriff's office, so there's a chart there for you. And that's all I have.
Very good. Okay, our next meeting is scheduled for May 7th at 1:30 p.m. Quick question it is.
You know I'm not going to ask a quick question, therefore I've not asked any, but may I make a statement? And it is a quick question, actually. Two statements. One is apparently Commissioner Sorensen was speaking for new members without speaking to them, because all but I have spoken quite a lot, sir. Number two. Number two, just a technical question. I want to thank everyone that testified. I think that's important. Since a lot of the testimony thus far related to something, I have a question for staff. What I see on the initial page of county dues for other organizations, and I just want clarification here because I've heard conflicting testimony. I see O&C membership dues in the proposed budget, but I see O&C legal fund taken out last year and lined out this year. Am I seeing that correctly?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And thank you. That was my only question. The only other statement I wanted, did I say something wrong?
No, he was just.
That was the general counsel. I got to watch myself.
I could add a little bit on that was a specific line item for 3 different years. So that's why it's not a continuing every year thing.
Thank you.
Yes.
And then my only other question as it relates to budget is I'm confused. My understanding is that the 5 county commissioners would make policy that would relate to staying or not in organizations that the county pays dues to, and yet it looks as if that's not the case here because it's part of a budget that needs to be approved. Am I the only one confused on that?
No, we still do, the discussion of the budget committee does have the ability to make any line item change that they want to the budget, but the Board of Commissioners are our policymakers. So, yes, and you could always.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry if I went over.
Okay, so next meeting, May 7th, 1:30 p.m. Meeting is adjourned.
Peace.